It's important to know as we go through these rankings today that these rankings are going to be for a traditional redraft type of format. So if you're in a half PPR league with a 1 quarterback, 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 1 tight end, 1 flex, 1 defense, and 1 kicker format, these are the rankings that these are geared towards, since most leagues that we play in are in this type of format right here. So we're going through the top 60 fantasy football rankings for 2024 fantasy football, and I need to announce this week's winner of the free FFN hat, which was Randy Page 26. Randy's big prediction for his sleeper defense was Houston Texans defense as the sleeper defense. So congratulations, Randy. You won the free FFN hat. Email me at footballfanalystnetwork@gmail.com and I'll send you your free hat. And I'm still giving away free FFN hats. And the way to qualify to get one is to go down there, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and give me your favorite wide receiver sleeper that you've been drafting in 2024. So please go down there, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and give me your favorite sleeper. So let's go through this first tier right here. Nothing changes for me personally. Christian McCaffrey still is the preferred #1 pick. I just can't, in my right mind, tell anybody to not draft Christian McCaffrey. Like, I understand that it's not a good thing that he's coming into the season with an injury, and we don't exactly know like how good he's going to look week 1. But what I do know is that he's the only player in fantasy football that can outscore his running back 2 by 100 points. There's just not any other guy that could do what Christian McCaffrey can do. So that's the reason he's at #1. Because if we look back and I tell you guys, draft one of these 2 wide receivers ahead of him, and McCaffrey ends up smashing this year, it's going to look really bad. So we just got to go with Christian McCaffrey. I understand he's a scary 101, but he's the right pick. And then with Tyreek Hill and CeeDee Lamb, I've been very consistent. I prefer Tyreek Hill because of a splitting hairs argument, which I won't really get into since we've got a lot of players to go through. But I personally prefer Tyreek over CD. That being said, they're both elite wide receiver 1s on their own team. So if you want to go with CeeDee Lamb, that's fine. Just keep in mind he is still currently holding out of training camp, which sometimes increases the likelihood of an injury during the season. Now, this next tier right here, I've got Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson to start out this tier. So obviously, these are the other 2 running backs that you can get as great consolation prizes if you don't have access to Christian McCaffrey and you want to take a running back in the first round. Obviously, these 2 players right here, they're very, very close. Now, I switched Breece over Bijan a couple weeks back because once I kind of sat down and had an honest reassessment of this one, what I realized is that Breece Hall, like, I love both players. Breece Hall, the advantage that he has is that he doesn't have a impending competition for any touches. Like, Bijan shouldn't, but there still is a shadow of a doubt since the offensive coordinator recently came out and said, yeah, we're probably going to have Tyler Algier still involved. Like, nobody wants to hear that. There's no discussion in New York about Braylon Allen actually taking away touches from Breece Hall. So Breece Hall, just because of that reason, is the guy I prefer at running back. Now, these next 3 receivers, they're obviously elite options. Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson. You can organize Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamar Chase however you want to, in my opinion. The reason I prefer Jamar Chase is because I know there's more big play ability with Jamar Chase. I know that he has the potential to give 40, 45-point weeks, which is ridiculous sounding, but he has done that in the past. And with Amon-Ra St. Brown, particularly if you're in a PPR format, I probably prefer him over Jamar because we know his floor is so ridiculously safe because he's so clearly the best pass-catching option. And also with Jamar Chase, it's also worth noting he is currently holding out as well in Cincinnati, waiting for a new contract. So again, kind of applies with what CeeDee Lamb, but the problem I have is with him, maybe he's not fresh and ready to go right away, and maybe that causes injury. I still prefer Jamar Chase just a little bit personally. But Justin Jefferson, I prefer both of those guys over Justin Jefferson this year. Where I'm at with Justin Jefferson is I believe that he's going to do his thing. I don't think that there's going to be a problem with his own personal efficiency and production because he's still an elite player. The problem, obviously, is Sam Darnold, right? Like, Sam Darnold, as his quarterback for the majority of the season, if not all of it, is just not a very good sign. I still believe he's going to get peppered with targets this year. And like I said, he's good enough to still do his thing. But obviously, the ceiling is lower when you go from Kirk Cousins to Sam Darnold. So I really do think that Justin Jefferson is clearly the worst wide receiver in fantasy, as weird as that is to say. than Jamar Chase and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now, dropping down to our next tier here, this is where I start to deviate a little bit from ESPN, and that's kind of what I'm going to highlight going through these next several tiers, is the differences I have between ADP on ESPN and my own personal rankings. Jahmyr Gibbs is the number one guy in this tier at number 9, and the reason I like Jahmyr Gibbs so much this year is just because of offense. Obviously, in Detroit, the offense is very, very special. It's a extremely run-first offense and really breeds like 2 great running backs in fantasy football. So with Jahmyr Gibbs, I just believe in the player and I believe in the system. And I also believe that, you know, with his injury right now, it's similar to a Christian McCaffrey thing where it's like a little bit scary. And that's why I think his ADP has dropped. 17.2 ADP on ESPN. Now, am I going out and telling you to draft Jahmyr Gibbs way over ADP? No, I don't believe so. If you're at the back of the first round, may as well just wait until the second round to take Jahmyr Gibbs, because ADP is definitely how you should be drafting your players. You don't want to overdraft somebody by a lot. So Jahmyr Gibbs definitely is going to be a good first or second round pick, but based on ADP on ESPN, might as well play the ADP game and get him in round 2. AJ Brown is at number 10 here, and I think my fear with AJ Brown is really tied to the Eagles' offense. I have a scary feeling about the Eagles this year. I can't put my finger on it, but one of the big things for me is the rift that is between Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni. So it really does worry me for AJ Brown, but obviously we know AJ is the wide receiver 1. They just traded for Jahan Dotson today, but we know that it's AJ Brown and it's Devonta Smith. That's the game that they're playing. They're both very highly paid, and there's going to be weeks where Devonta Smith takes away from AJ's production, but AJ is definitely the higher upside player and clear wide receiver 1. Now, with Jonathan Taylor at 11 here, I just think that Jonathan Taylor is a better option than Garrett Wilson at 12, because we really know for certain that Jonathan Taylor is going to be running with a very efficient offense led by a very good offensive first coach. And while I do believe that he has the potential of having touchdowns in the red zone sharked by Anthony Richardson, I still do believe in the player, and I think that he's young enough that he's still going to be a very efficient running back and break off big plays. With Garrett Wilson, I believe in the player. It really all relies on Aaron Rodgers, though. And I'm not saying Aaron Rodgers is going to be bad this year, but I don't think he'll be what we're used to seeing with Aaron Rodgers. 40-year-old quarterback coming off an Achilles injury just recently said, yeah, training camp's been pretty tough this year. So there's a lot that worries me about this situation, because essentially what we're looking at with Garrett Wilson is clearly he's the number 1 target regardless, but we're either going to be looking at 160 targets from a pretty decent Aaron Rodgers or 160 targets from what he's been dealing with all the past 2 years, and that's the difference, like between elite fantasy production and mediocre, moderate fantasy production. So just a little bit of a scarier first round pick in my eyes. Kyren Williams and Puka Nacua round out this tier right here at 13 and 14. And with Kyren Williams, the reason I like him more than Puka is because we just know that based on what happened last year, that his upside in fantasy is so electric. Like, Puka obviously was great, but he wasn't averaging close to 20 fantasy points per game. And the only reason that Kyren wasn't ranked higher for me throughout the offseason was because it did scare me. Like, the whole thing with Blake Corum and Sean McVay's history with running backs and being weird at that position sometimes, it made me nervous for sure. But at this point, I don't have any reason to believe that Blake Corum's going to shark real touches away from Kyren. And Puka, I could just point out more potential issues with because of Cooper Kupp. And if Cooper Kupp's fully healthy, I think he definitely eats away at Puka's ceiling. And also, Matt Stafford is the big question mark for me personally, because he's not exactly the healthiest guy, and he's in his mid-30s, getting closer to 40 at this point. So I have more questions with Puka, but I obviously still think he's a great player. Now, at this next tier right here, I'm starting out with Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, and Devon Achane here. Now, with Derrick Henry, the reason I prefer him over Saquon Barkley, and I've gone over this in ton, so I'll try to shorten it just for the sake of all the rest of the players. Derrick Henry is the guy I believe can excel at something this year between him and Saquon. I believe that Derrick Henry could lead the league in rushing touchdowns this year. I fully believe this is possible. There's a reason why Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins have had very high touchdown rushing seasons with Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson, as great of a runner as he is, doesn't run at the goal line very much. His touchdown totals on the ground, they prove that. The reason is because he's not Josh Allen. He's not Jalen Hurts. He's not one of these just like big built dudes who the teams don't really have fear of getting hurt in the red zone. Lamar's not small, but he's smaller than those guys, which leaves the running backs with tons of red zone opportunities in an efficient offense. So with Derrick Henry, I believe that maybe doesn't out-touch Saquon Barkley, but I think has the better shot at getting a ton of rushing touchdowns. Whereas with Saquon Barkley, I don't see the rushing touchdowns, and I think people are starting to see that as well because of the tush push. The real thing that people are banking on with Saquon, in my opinion, is the receiving upside. Now, I'm not debating whether or not Saquon can get 2-3 receptions per game. What I am debating here is that don't forget that Kenneth Gainwell and Will Shipley are currently fighting for the number 2 role, and they're both pass-catching running backs here. So I just don't believe that Saquon is going to monopolize the reception totals in the running back field. So that's my personal opinion on both those guys. Now with Devon Achane, the reason he's over Isaiah Pacheco at 18 is because I just think the upside is so incredibly ridiculous with Devon Achane. Yes, that Raheem Mostert is going to be a factor as long as he's healthy, and if he's not healthy, Jalen Wright will be a factor. Because the reality is, Miami wants a 2 running back system. But they have mastered that system so well to where it's similar to Detroit, where they can easily both have 2 top 24 running backs in fantasy football in a given season. Devon Achane's upside this year is not just through the carries, which he will get, probably similar to Raheem Mostert. It's going to be the reception upside that he's going to see with an immobile quarterback, Tua, and not a great offensive line that probably will break down. So just with the running system with Mike McDaniel, I see so much upside here. Probably not the safest floor, but all I see is upside, which is what I believe you should see as well because you're trying to win in fantasy. With Isaiah Pacheco, he's a riser for me right now, but the one thing that still worries me is last year, he was the clear guy, and he struggled to get over 200 carries. Now, this year, he looks more set up for success because Andy Reid, when asked, who's your third down back, he's like, it's him. It's Isaiah Pacheco. It's not a question who the guy is this year. So, I do like that, but I will say that we haven't seen an elite running back in fantasy with Mahomes since Kareem Hunt, and I just don't know how likely it's going to be this year. But obviously, Isaiah Pacheco, great pick in fantasy. James Cook is at 19, and then I've got 3 wide receivers to follow him up with. Nico Collins, Marvin Harrison Jr., and DJ Moore. Now, with James Cook, I just think that James Cook, the problem with him and Isaiah Pacheco is I think they'll both be 3-down backs. But I believe in Pacheco's ability to get more rushing touchdowns than James Cook. Problem with James Cook is obviously Josh Allen. He had 2 rushing touchdowns last year for a reason, because Josh Allen sharks red zone carries away from running backs. That's just the reality, like I was saying. That's opposite of Lamar. They run Josh Allen at the goal line here. So I think that James Cook ultimately will have a lot of receptions this year with this backfield, but I don't believe that he's going to see a bunch of rushing touchdowns, which is why I prefer Pacheco over him. Now with Nico Collins, Marvin Harrison Jr., and DJ Moore here, Nico Collins I've got pretty highly ranked over his ADP. His ADP is 35.7 on ESPN right now. Now with Nico Collins, this is just a guy I simply believe in Houston. I believe he is the wide receiver 1. Listen, he's got over $50 million guaranteed over the next 3 years. You don't pay the guy that much money if you're not trying to make him your wide receiver 1. Keyword, they're going to try to make him their wide receiver 1. Whether or not he can capitalize on that, that's up to him. I believe he will be able to capitalize on it since he came off such an elite year with CJ Stroud and just a year 2 natural progression for both of them. I think that this is going to be a good fit. Now with Marvin Harrison Jr., highest ranked rookie wide receiver, I have had it in a long time. Big on Marvin Harrison Jr. this year. It's rare that you see a wide receiver as a rookie get a very good above average quarterback as their quarterback. Most of these guys who are elite wide receiver talents going in the top 5 picks, they're getting stuck with bad quarterbacks. Look at Malik Neighbors, right? The good thing about Marvin is he's got Kyler Murray, and the only reason they were able to get him is because Kyler missed a lot of time at the beginning of last year. So Marvin Harrison, clear wide receiver 1, pro-ready prospect, definitely going to be a solid pick in fantasy. And then with DJ Moore, I've got him significantly above ESPN ADP. This is one of the biggest steals of the draft in any format. 47.9 ADP on ESPN is ridiculously low. You need to take advantage of that. Look, I know we've all seen the Caleb Williams hype during the preseason. Like, he's doing ridiculous things. Mahomes level throws, running out of the pocket, making stuff happen. Like, it's ridiculous what he's able to do. Now, the question really is, like, with a not so great history of quarterbacks in fantasy football year one producing wide receivers, I would counter that argument and say CJ Stroud did it last year. I think Caleb Williams is an ultra talent, and DJ Moore is clearly the wide receiver one. He's the number one because he's absolutely massively paid, and he really is the best talent out of the group. And this dude had almost 1,400 receiving yards last year with Justin Fields. So when I look on Underdog and I see his line at 1,000.5 receiving yards, this is a smash higher to me. They actually just raised this from 950 to 1,000. Still too low. Still a smash higher because, again, he did it with Justin Fields last year. Smashed that. He's going to do it again with Caleb Williams, the better thrower this year. So if you're as bullish on DJ Moore hitting this total as I am, go to Underdog today using the link in the comments below. And when you use code FFN to deposit money, they will give you a bonus cash offer up to $1,000 at a 50% match. So they will literally throw free money at you to go play in some Underdog drafts, to go get in on this line right here. And that offer is not going to last forever. So if you want to take advantage of it today, go down in the comments, grab that link, use code FFN to sign up. Now this next tier, we're going to start getting into quarterback tight end territory right here. Sam Laporta, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes. So with Sam Laporta, I prefer him over Travis Kelce. And we'll get into Travis Kelce here in a couple picks. I prefer him over him because he's the younger player and he's on an offense that maybe is not better, but is very, very efficient. And he is clearly the second best pass catching option in this offense. So just with the efficiency, how this offense is run, and how valuable he was to them as a year one tight end, I don't see a way where there's not natural progression in his second year. Now with Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, I prefer Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts over Mahomes because of the rushing upside, obviously. Mahomes is not going to get you the rushing upside that those two guys are, which is why, like, I think Mahomes is great because he should be, according to Vegas Insider, the passing yards leader in the NFL this year, but he obviously just doesn't provide that rushing upside. So with Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, rank them however you want to. Again, I prefer Allen because I think he's a better player, number one. Hurts is very good. He's very, very good. But again, there's something about the Eagles that's like putting me off right now. The Sirianni thing is putting me off. I think it has potential to blow up, but obviously just like a ridiculous talent. He's got so many weapons, more than Josh Allen. So if you want to put him over Josh Allen, be my guest. Now, Josh Jacobs at 27 and Travis Etienne at 28 are going to be very good running back picks as well. Josh Jacobs, I think, is very undervalued on ESPN. He's got a 40.8 ADP on ESPN right now. So this is obviously a great situation with Josh Jacobs, way better than he's ever had in Las Vegas. Las Vegas, he was dealing with a mediocre offensive line and a below average offense. And this is just like, it's easily the best situation he's ever going to come into. Green Bay's efficient offense with Jordan Love. He's got a better offensive line and just a better offensive coach in general. They gave him money, a bunch of money this year. And I know that LaFleur tends to like to use a running back by committee, but the guy that he wants to use, Marshawn Lloyd, he's been injured for most of the offseason. Mid-round pick, injured for most of training camp, not a good combination historically. So while he may want that, they're not doing it with A.J. Dillon right out of the gate, so it might take a little while, and by that time, they just may realize Josh Jacobs is too elite to put on the sidelines. Now with Travis Etienne, only problem I have with him this year, I like the player. I think on less touches, he will be more efficient, and that's the problem, is that for consistently throughout the offseason, Doug Peterson, the head coach, has said, we're going to limit his workload this year. Tank Bigsby will be more involved. Now, yes, there was talk about that last year, but it wasn't actually serious talk. Like, last year, the narrative around Travis Etienne was like, he could be like a 1,700 yard guy. That's what Doug Peterson was saying about him. This year, it's totally not the same. The talks are way different. And the reason is because they realize, like, Etienne is a great running back, but he's not built for all those opportunities. That's why he was inefficient last year. So they're trying to make him more efficient by lowering his workload, and that ultimately will hurt his fantasy ceiling. Now with Michael Pittman Jr. and Chris Olave, they're rounding it out here at 29 and 30, just one spot over Travis Kelce at 31. Pittman and Olave, rank him how you want to. I prefer Pittman, and the reason why is because with Pittman, I want to bank on the wide receiver attached to a younger quarterback who is ascending with a great offensive coach rather than try to risk my bet on a wide receiver with a descending quarterback and a very bad offense in general. Like, yes, Clint Kubiak is there. A lot is going to rest on Derek Carr's shoulders, though. So they're both going to be the wide receiver one. They're both going to be like around 150, 160 targets. So I want to go with the guy who I think has the more touchdown upside, which in my opinion will be Michael Pittman Jr. Now, I like them both more than Travis Kelce. I've got him ranked below ADP on ESPN, 23.5 ADP on ESPN. And I just simply think that with Travis Kelce, like, he's 30, he's like in his mid 30s and he declined last year. So like, why people are choosing to ignore that, I don't understand why. Laporte is the better tight end pick here. He's not all of a sudden going to resurge and like have an elite year. That's just not what happens. So definitely Hall of Fame guy, definitely has a name recognition. I'm sure that's part of why he's going higher in ESPN. But I would just say to you, don't pick him unless he's going to fall to you in like the mid-third round of ESPN drafts. Now, the next tier right here starts out with Mike Evans. And Mike Evans, I just think that, you know, with him, there's a lot of upside, obviously, with touchdowns. Like, he's been, like, one of the lone guys who's really made, like, touchdowns a consistent thing in his fantasy production. The problem that worries me, without Dave Canales, the offensive coordinator last year, and with Baker Mayfield, Baker's been a very, very unstable quarterback throughout his career. So maybe Dave Canales just knew how to work with him. So I wonder what the efficiency is going to look like this year with Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield. But obviously, Mike Evans historically been a very good pick, very volatile though. So I think his floor is a little bit lower, but his ceiling is obviously very high. Now, I've got Lamar Jackson one spot behind CJ Stroud at 33 and 34, and I've got CJ Stroud ranked above consensus. CJ Stroud, his ADP right now on ESPN is 46.8. So I obviously believe in CJ Stroud more than I believe in Lamar, and the reason is because not only is he projected to be the second leading passer according to Vegas Insider behind only Mahomes, he's obviously got tons of weapons to work with, just a year two natural progression in a good culture led by DeMeco Ryans. And I think that with Lamar Jackson, obviously he presents the rushing upside that Stroud does not, but we're kind of relying on a lot of rushing upside every year with Lamar Jackson. Like, we've seen years past where he hasn't repeated the 2019 elite season, and even last year, like, he was good, but he wasn't that elite. The reason is because, like, he doesn't throw that much. He doesn't throw for many yards, and yes, he's efficient on his throws, but not throwing many touchdowns and just not throwing for much yardage on a per season basis. So a lot relies on his rushing upside. And I'm not saying that he won't have it this year, but not exactly the healthiest player and getting closer to 30. What if he's just, you know, getting to the point of his career where he's not going to be as good rushing? Like, I think it's time to start at least questioning that in our own heads. That's why I prefer CJ over Lamar this year. Now, I've got Rachaad White at 35, Davante Adams at 36, Drake London at 37 here. I prefer Rachaad over those two receivers because I believe that the volume is so ridiculously high with Rachaad White. I don't see any reason to believe that Bucky Irving takes real touches away from Rachaad White. Like, I think he will be involved on certain plays, maybe take some receiving touches away from him, but Rachaad White ultimately probably still gets close to 300 opportunities this year. And I just think that the ultimate problem I have with Rachaad White is the inefficiency, obviously, but with that much volume and with that much potential receiving upside, definitely like him in this range. With Davante Adams, Drake London, honestly, take your pick. I don't trust either one of them, but I know Davante Adams has a safe floor, and I know that Drake London has a high ceiling. Davante's floor is pretty safe, but I will say this year, I don't love Davante Adams. I think he's being overdrafted. I don't love his situation at all with Gardner Minshew. I think it's bad. He's talked publicly about, like, bring Tom Brady into play for us. So, like, he's clearly not happy with the situation. He's obviously going to lead the team in targets by a mile, but, you know, he's coming into, like, his early 30s, and this is kind of the age where we start to see a decline. So I just think it kind of might naturally happen this year. And with Drake London, I simply personally just need to see this one play out first. I just can't trust him. No 1,000-yard receiving seasons, yes. And yes, like, he's had bad quarterback play. So has Garrett freaking Wilson. Garrett Wilson has done it twice. 1,000-yard seasons back-to-back. So This notion that like they're on the same level, I just don't buy it personally, especially when, again, a quarterback in his mid-30s coming off an Achilles tear. I need to see it with Drake London first, but obviously I know his ceiling with Cousins is very, very high because he is the clear target number one. Now, to round out this tier, I've got Trey McBride and Mark Andrews here at 38 and 39. I'm drafting Trey McBride above consensus right here, 53.6 ADP on ESPN. I think it's very severely undervalued. I think that Trey McBride easily has potential to be the tight end one in fantasy this year. I really do believe that. I think he's got a better shot than Andrews. And obviously, Andrews is going to be a very good pick at the tight end position. But my problem with Mark Andrews is that, again, older player and is just not been the healthiest guy over the last several years. So I would rather take the younger player with a quarterback I think is better at throwing the ball. Maybe doesn't love the tight end position as much as Lamar, which is what makes Mark Andrews so valuable a lot. But I would rather bank on this player, Trey McBride, because I believe that his upside is truly elite, while I believe Mark Andrews' upside is like probably tight end 2, tight end 3, which is obviously still great. So if you want to rank them like differently, go ahead and do it. I'm just telling you why my conviction on Trey McBride is the way it is over Mark Andrews. Now, go into this next tier right here. We're going into Alvin Kamara at 40. And again, I made this comparison that Alvin Kamara is on a sinking ship offense in the running back rankings video I did earlier in the week. Now, I got some pushback for saying that, and I think a lot is being revolved. Like, a lot of people who believe in the Saints are really buying into Clint Kubiak. And listen, I like the Kubiaks. Kubiak family name very, very much has weight in the NFL. Offensively, they've been very good. But again, you're still relying on Derek Carr, who was really bad last year. And they made no personnel moves at all. So, like, it is a sinking ship. I'm sorry. I just don't see how this isn't. But that said, Kamara does benefit from it because he will get so many freaking checkdowns. Now, the reason I prefer a guy like Rachaad White over Alvin Kamara is because I know with Alvin Kamara, he's not going to get as many rushing opportunities as Rachaad White will. He's going to get tons of receiving work, and based on last year, we know that he can still provide in that area, but he's going to be very efficient on the ground, probably will not get many, if any, rushing touchdowns, and is going to get a ton of reception work, which is why I have him at 40. Now, the rest of this tier is mapped out with wide receivers that I really like in this range, actually. Jalen Waddle, 41, Deebo Samuel, 42, Brandon Ayuk, 43, Devonta Smith, 44, Rashee Rice, 45, and Cooper Kupp, 46. Now, all these guys really, with the exception of like maybe Devonta Smith, have elite upside in fantasy. I'm not saying Devonta doesn't have upside. Obviously, he has upside. But those guys are all pretty volatile with a lower floor than Devonta Smith. So if you want to go with the safer floor guy who has good upside, Devonta Smith is your pick here. Again, I'm more of a risk taker in fantasy football. I see lots of upside with Jalen Waddle, lots of upside with the 49ers wide receivers, and Rashee Rice is one of the fastest risers for me. He could very well be towards the top of this tier in like 2 weeks. Rashee Rice right now on ESPN, 89.9 ADP. That's so low. And the only reason it's so low is because of the fear of suspension. Well, the reason that he's like one of the fastest risers on every single platform's draft board, because the more and more time the days go by without any discussion of suspension this year, no meeting set up with the NFL, it looks more and more unlikely that he's going to be suspended in 2024. It likely will come in 2025. So he's actively one of my favorite picks at cost. Again, do not overdraft him in the 4th round because you can get him later. So I'm just saying he should be in here rightfully without any of those concerns. And like I said, I just think that these wide receivers in this tier are all very good value picks. Now, starting on our next tier here, I've got Dalton Kincaid at 47, Anthony Richardson at 48. With Dalton Kincaid, I'm drafting him above consensus. 61.7 ADP on ESPN. And with Dalton Kincaid, I think is a really high upside guy and really like could be the number 1 target very well in Buffalo. The only thing that holds me back from putting him in the Trey McBride and Mark Andrews territory is because of the $50 million whale that is Dawson Knox. Like, that dude has a lot of money attached to him, so they're not going to just put him on the bench or just put him in exclusive run blocking situations. They will find ways to get Dawson Knox the ball, which ultimately does lower the potential ceiling of Dalton Kincaid, but I really do love stacking Dalton Kincaid with Josh Allen on ESPN, and really on Underdog too. I think it's a great stack. But I will say that there is that shadow of a doubt with Dawson Knox taking away legitimate volume, which at tight end position, like, we need as much volume as we can get to be elite. And Anthony Richardson, the scariest quarterback pick for me personally. I have a lot of fears with Anthony Richardson in particular because we all know that, like, the reason he's here is because he has ridiculous rushing upside in fantasy football. We all understand that. The reality with him is that he's been inefficient as a thrower dating back to college. Very, very inefficient. And we only saw him last year with like a 3-game sample size. It's not enough for me to be super confident. That being said, I do like the upside of the player, which is why I've taken him, but I've not taken him quite as much as those other quarterbacks above him. Now, David Montgomery, Kenneth Walker, they're at 49 and 50. I've got Montgomery significantly over ADP as well. 72.3 ADP on ESPN. I think Montgomery is just in a great situation again with Detroit's offense. I think his role is very secure in this offense, but what I will say is we're very dependent on that role of being the goal line running back in Detroit. I think it will happen, but it is very dependent on him being that guy, which is why I don't have him ranked like a little bit higher actually. But again, at the range you pick him at, I think he's a great pick. And Kenneth Walker, I got flack for this in my running back rankings video, discussing my issues with Kenneth Walker. And listen, I think he's the better player. Like, I really think he's the better player. I think he's been hosed by Seattle really mostly. But I've also read, like, Zach Charbonnet is going to be involved, like, more than last year, and has a legit chance to flip the backfield in his favor. I don't believe that will happen because I don't believe he's the better player. But what I will say with Kenneth Walker is if we're expecting him to monopolize the backfield this year, I think we're crazy. I don't think that, even with Ryan Grubb saying very nice things about Kenneth Walker, they have second-round draft capital attached to Zach Charbonnet. Now, I get it. That was the last regime. They're out of the building now. But it's still significant capital. And Charbonnet's not a bad player, so they feel like they have to use what they just spent on him. But Kenneth Walker, ultimately, to me, still a little bit worried for me personally, while I do think he's the better running back. Now, Malik Neighbors at 51, Stephon Diggs at 52, and Tank Dell at 53 to round out this tier. Malik Neighbors, the reason I prefer him over those two Texans players is because we know the volume is going to be there with Malik Neighbors, and even though the upside may not be that high, I think it's probably a little bit higher than Diggs and Dell because, again, I see them both as wide receiver twos in this offense. Now, that being the case, I think that Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell are potentially very high upside guys. I think Diggs is the guy, based on everything we've seen from the preseason so far, looks like the number 1 or number 2 wide receiver. He's in on all starter snaps, basically. And it also looks like that Tank Dell is going to be coming in, like, not sparingly, but, like, not as consistently on the field with starters as much as Stephon Diggs and Nico Collins are. I prefer Tank Dell personally, especially at cost, 67.9 ADP on ESPN. And Stephon Diggs, personally, too high for me to take. 36 ADP on ESPN. So I prefer drafting Tank Dell, but as far as we can tell right now, it looks like Stephon Diggs may be the better fantasy player. Now, to round out these rankings, our last tier has got Joe Mixon at the top, and I just want to say this. I caution everybody with Joe Mixon right now. I really severely do not understand the fascination with Mixon as much this year. 31.3 ADP on ESPN. I haven't touched him. Like, really in any league. Underdog, ESPN sleeper, I have not touched Joe Mixon. Look, I get it. Last year, like, he was a great running back in fantasy, but it's a guy who's 28 years old and has not, like, barely taken the field with the Houston Texans this year. Similar offense to Cincinnati for sure, but I just don't really believe that Joe Mixon at this point of his career is going to be an elite player anymore. So I've got significant concerns with him. We can get into that later, but in my opinion, just down here, because I don't believe that his volume is really going to be enough to catapult him into, like, Alvin Kamara range, for example. Now I've got George Kittle at 55, James Conner at 56, Zay Flowers at 57. George Kittle, to me, good consolation prize if you don't get Dalton Kincaid. We know the guy's going to go off for big explosion weeks. We just know it won't be consistent. With James Conner, I think it's also very underdrafted on ESPN. 80.6 ADP. Again, don't take him this high, but definitely has the potential to be a really good running back in fantasy, very efficient last year, and Trey Benson is not really threatening him right away for the running back one. Zay Flowers, we know that, like, with him and the last several receivers here, T. Higgins, DK Metcalf, Calvin Ridley, we know that Zay is probably the safest floor of the bunch. I think that his floor is going to be there because his volume is going to be really good, but I don't think that his upside is quite as high. With T. Higgins, I think the upside is really high. Cincinnati, he's on a contract here in a good offense. He wants to produce. DK Metcalf, consistently one of the most overrated players in fantasy. Really like the talent, obviously. Great talent, but always overdrafted in ESPN and really in every format. 37.6 ADP. Just not going to be there for him with another year of Jack Smith-Njigba and not a great quarterback. And then Calvin Ridley really is going to be a wide range of outcomes here. Not the safest floor, but I also think relatively high ceiling, all dependent on whether Will Levis hits or not. So let me know what you think of the rankings in the comments below. And if you want to see the top 12 defense rankings for 2024, click on this video right here.